Struggling with artifacts? I'm not talking about getting good ones, we've all been there. I'm talking about building new characters. Even if you consider yourself skillful in that area, stick around, I'll go for some tips and tricks I use to improve my artifact management that you might find helpful. You can use timestamps to get in the section you're interested in, but I really recommend watching it fully. So let's get started. If you ever wondered how stats in general work, then here. Artifacts can be one of 5 possible rarities from 1 to 5 star. Most artifact sets you can farm are either 3 to 4 stars or 4 to 5 stars. Each artifact has a main stat and few substats it drops with. Keep in mind, substats cannot be the same as main stat. Through upgrade you can get up to 4 substats, or if you already have all 4 of them you can upgrade existing ones. You probably heard that you should not waste your resources upgrading anything less than 5-star artifact unless you really struggle with current content. You also probably know that artifacts of less rarity can be upgraded less times and have less substats they start with. And while it's true, it's not the only reason. You also get a lot less substats per level. Here's a whole table with possible substats. So as you can see, by choosing 4-star over 5-star you lose a lot, but it can still be a decent option if you struggle with certain set piece. Now you know how stats work, but which artifacts to keep and which to throw away? There are 2 general roles, DPS characters, which include off-field DPSs, and supports. For DPSs you want to have attack or equivalent stat they scale off, for example HP for Hutao and Yelan or defense for Noel and Ito, crit rate and crit damage. Every DPS needs that unless you are building DPS Kokomi. Some of them may also want energy recharge if you want to use their ult on cooldown, especially off-field DPSs like Shanling or Xingqiu, and elemental mastery if you're running elemental reactions. Supports usually want HP for heal shield or equivalent like defense for Noel, and again energy recharge if you want their ultimate. There are exceptions like Bennett who also needs base attack for his attack buff, but you'll have to explore them yourself. So with knowledge what stars are good for certain characters, we can go to the next part. How to choose artifacts to keep without upgrading them first. I'll use 5-star artifact as example, but it also works with any, although I wouldn't recommend worrying about substats on 4-star artifact or less, since you will probably move on very quickly. First stage. You keep any artifact that the main stat you need. Yes, it won't give you too much, but main stat is about 50 to 60% of maximum amount of stat an artifact can give you. But you probably noticed that Flower and Feather have constant main stat. That's right. You can only get HP flat on Flower and attack flat on Feather, so you can start picking only those that have at least 1 or 2 substats you want. If your artifact has only 3 substats, you can just upgrade it to +4 since you don't lose any XP when you feed it to the next artifact. Second stage, you are getting decent amount of artifacts with main stats you need and you can start becoming picky. This stage is where I recommend to stay unless you want your characters to become super strong. 2 or 3 needed substats for Flower, Feather and Goblet, and 1 or 2 for Sense and Circlet. You might get confused. Why I recommend being picky with Goblet although it's hardest piece to get main stat on? It's because sets require only 4 pieces to work, so you can run Goblet from any set. And that way you probably will get a lot of decent Goblets. But don't get me wrong, it's just general idea. If you see that you have tons of artifacts to feed but none to upgrade, maybe you should lower your standards and try upgrading artifacts with only 1 substat. But if you will upgrade every artifact with at least 1 good substat, you may very quickly find yourself short on XP. Of course, you might get great artifact if all 5 or 4 upgrades will go in the needed stat, but chances are slim. Every stage after that is just about raising your standards, so 3 or 4 for Flower, Feather and Goblet, 2 or 3 for Sense and Circlet and etc. You can figure it out. Okay, now it's time to upgrade your artifacts. You got good ones upgraded but can't really tell which one is better? Well again, there are 2 ways. First, easy one. Just count procs in good substats. So you had artifacts with 1 substat that proc there 2 times, then you have 3 overall procs. If you have artifacts with 2 good substats and 3 procs there, it'll be 5 overall. Got the idea? Great. Now, this option was for newbies, or those who don't want to think too much, since it doesn't care about low and high rolls that you again can find in this table. Better option is to count your substats, but values are different, so we need to modify them a bit. I like to only modify crit rate, elemental mastery and flat stats, but you can do it different. So, with crit rate I just double that number, for flat I put imaginary dot in between, for elemental mastery I do the same as for flat stats but also double it in the end. Then, you just add those numbers and voila, you got your stat value for certain artifact. Now you can just compare those values to see which artifact is better. But wait, does it mean that you can just stack artifacts with best stat value and get the best character you can? No, stats should be balanced. You probably heard about golden 2 to 1 ratio and how sometimes attack circuit can be better than crit 1. So let me show you how to actually determine what's better. Formula is actually pretty simple, and you should be able to understand it if you ever faced math. So, convert your crit damage to plain number and add 1 to it. It'll be your crit damage. Multiply that number by your converted crit rate and your attack, and then add your attack multiplied by 1 minus your crit rate. You got the average damage. That is exactly the number that you can use to reference how good your DPS character is. For energy recharge, you usually want to get enough to get your ultimate back in time and no more, since it'll be a waste. With Elemental Mastery, it's a bit tricky, and I'll cover it in the next section, but generally you're happy with 150 or 250 Elemental Mastery. Let's now talk about other multipliers, such as Elemental Mastery and set bonuses that aren't plain stats, and how to pick which set is better. Sometimes you can see different bonuses on set like Wanderers or Emblem. Those mostly work as separate multiplier, so for example, Wanderers set give you 35% bonus damage, which is a 1.35 multiplier. So just take your average damage, multiply it by 1.35 and you'll get a new value. Pretty easy, huh? But keep in mind, sometimes you can see same bonuses on weapons and sets and they do not work as separate multipliers. For example, if you're a psycho like me and use Shimenawa set with White Tassel on your Hutao, you won't get flat 50% bonus. Your multiplier will go from around 1.5 to 2, which is only 33% bonus. Works the same with bonus elemental damage. Same goes with elemental reactions, that multiply your damage such as Vaporize or Melt. They have 2x multiplier for usual and 1.5 for reverse, but you don't need those for calculations unless you are comparing teams with and without elemental reactions. Then you can find additional multiplier for those in stats menu. You can just convert them to plain number as crit and multiply your average damage by it again. This part was already pretty difficult, and you can disregard most of this stuff and use previous. But if you really want to maximize your damage output, you'll need to learn it eventually. Now, there are a lot more stuff to cover, but most of it is just yet another multiplier, and since you know how to deal with those, I believe you can figure it out yourself. Well, this video turned out to be a lot longer than I expected, but I managed to cover most important stuff and I hope you found something new and useful for yourself. If you still have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments, I'll do my best to answer. And as always, see you guys in the next one, have a great day.